If you stand at the edge of the Appalachian Mountains on a quiet autumn evening, when the wind sinks low and the trees whisper like old storytellers, you may hear something that doesn't quite belong to the present. A faint, metallic clink. A distant voice calling a name the forest has forgotten. Some say it's only wind crawling through dead branches. Others swear it's the last echo of a vanished expedition, one that officially never existed, whose records were sealed, misplaced, or erased by the very nation that had commissioned it. But every generation, a hiker, a ranger, or a lost traveler encounters something that forces them to question the history they thought they knew. And if you trace all those scattered whispers back through time, past the Civil War, past the Revolution, past the fragile birth of the colonies, you arrive at the strange and unsettling spring of 1673, when 13 men walked into the American interior and were never seen again. This is not the story found in school textbooks. Those mention familiar names: Marquette, Joliet, La Salle figures who mapped rivers and carved their legacy into the geography of a growing continent. But buried in the shadows of archived letters, in private journals stained by humidity, and in the faint testimony of tribes who long predated European arrival, there exists another name. Few modern Americans have heard it, and those who have tend to dismiss it as myth or misinterpretation. Yet the existence of a single surviving artifact forces historians to confront a possibility they would rather ignore. The artifact is held in a climate-controlled vault beneath the Chicago Field Museum, a weathered brass astrolabe, engraved not in French, Spanish, or English, but in a cipher that no scholar has ever fully decoded. It was found in 1891 inside a cave near the Iowa-Illinois border, wrapped in animal hide that had somehow resisted decay. How it ended up there, and who brought it, remains one of the continent's most quietly disputed mysteries. The museum labels it simply Unknown Navigational Instrument, 17th century, probable European origin. But that label is a lie of omission, and every curator who has ever handled the artifact knows it. The story begins more than 2 centuries before its discovery, when the English colony of Rhode Island was still little more than a scattering of wooden houses and muddy streets. A young polymath named Nathaniel Brewster, a man with an uncanny gift for cartography and an obsession with celestial navigation, arrived from London in the winter of 1671. Almost nothing about his early life is certain. Some letters claim he was expelled from Oxford under suspicious circumstances. Others hint he had been quietly working for the Crown on a project so sensitive it remained unnamed. Whatever the truth, Brewster arrived in the New World restless, brilliant, and already carrying a secret that would shape the rest of his short and troubled life. By 1673, he had gathered a small company of men soldiers, craftsmen, 2 surveyors, 1 interpreter, and a surgeon. Officially, their mission was to establish a new inland route for trade. Unofficially, a according to a single coded report found in an English archive 2 centuries later. Brewster had been ordered to search for something referred to only as the Meridian Engine. No historian has ever found another reference to it. Those who believe the expedition existed argue the term likely referred to an advanced navigational device, rumored to have been in the possession of Spanish explorers, or even earlier civilizations. Skeptics say the report is a forgery, but someone carved the cipher onto that brass astrolabe, and someone built an expedition that was never listed in any colonial registry. Their departure was quiet, almost hidden. On the first morning of May 1673, before most of the settlement was awake, Brewster and his 12 companions loaded their equipment into canoes, pushed off the shore of a fog-covered river, and vanished into the wilderness. No official chronicle mentions them again. The first strange sign appeared 3 weeks later, when the men reached a Lenape village, whose people remembered them long after the colony forgot. According to later oral accounts recorded in the 19th century, the Lenape described the Englishmen as men who chased the sky, an odd phrase, until one remembers Brewster's device. The supposed Meridian Engine was said to rely on precise celestial alignment. They traveled westward with an intensity that worried even their guides, refusing to stop for ritual greetings, refusing to linger by firelight, refusing to share the true purpose of their journey. But the Lenape also spoke of something else. One of the Europeans was already afraid. He whispered to others that the device Brewster carried was wrong, that its measurements shifted every night, as though the stars themselves were moving in ways no chart predicted. Of course the stars move, everyone knows that, but this man believed something else. He said the engine was tracking something, not measuring it. And each night, whatever it was tracking was getting closer. One might easily dismiss this as mythologizing, if not for the journal page found in 1912 at an estate sale in Providence, Rhode Island. The page, judged authentic by handwriting experts, bears Nathaniel Brewster's unmistakable signature. The ink is smeared, as if written in haste or perhaps under stress, and the words are shaky. The alignment worsens. The divergence increases by nights, not days. I fear the machine does not predict, but responds, as though influenced by a force I have not been taught to interpret. Yet the crown expects results. We must proceed. No other pages survive. When the expedition reached the confluence of 2 rivers near what is now Pennsylvania, they were observed by a group of Susquehannock hunters. These hunters described the men as carrying a brass sun. Almost certainly, the astrolabe discovered centuries later. They also noted something stranger. In the middle of the night, the Europeans kept waking, convinced they heard someone walking just beyond the camp's perimeter. But when the hunters checked, they saw no one, only mist gathering thickly around the undergrowth. Even though mist should not have formed at that hour, the Europeans soon left, continuing west, following a course no other recorded expedition took at that time. Their path cut across lands that would not see another European footprint for decades. Yet someone or something followed them. A second Susquehannock account, preserved through translation, said, "The strangers walked fast, but what followed walked without sound. They tried to hide from it, but it hid with them. When they turned, it was behind. When they did not move, it moved. It is impossible to know how much of this is factual and how much is retrospective folklore. Such stories often grow embellished through retelling, but the convergence of native accounts, Brewster's surviving journal fragment, and the cryptic markings on the astrolabe suggest something was amiss long before the expedition reached the Mississippi Basin. On the first day of July 1673, the men camped at the base of a cliff, whose limestone face bore carvings older than any of them could fathom. These carvings, later identified by archaeologists who visited the site in the early 1900s, depicted concentric circles intersected by diagonal lines, symbols reminiscent not of Native American art, but of early astronomical diagrams. The cliff no longer stands. A century of quarrying destroyed it, but before it vanished, a sketch was made by a traveling geologist. The symbols in the sketch are nearly identical to the cipher etched on Brewster's brass instrument. Historians hate coincidences like this. They prefer evidence that fits into clean timelines and documented exchanges. But the Americas were full of civilizations long before Europeans ever dreamed of crossing the ocean, and many of those civilizations possessed astronomical knowledge rivaling or surpassing that of the West. Could the Meridian engine have been based on technology the English believed the Spanish had acquired from older peoples, or was Brewster attempting to trace something even more ancient, something hidden in the mathematics of the land itself? The night they camped beneath the cliff, something happened that none of the surviving native accounts describe clearly. The stories vary. Some say the men saw lights weaving among the trees, lights like lanterns carried by unseen hands. Others say the cliff face glowed faintly before going dark. Some claim the ground vibrated softly, like a heartbeat beneath soil. But all accounts agree on one detail. The men argued violently, and one of them tried to destroy the Meridian engine with an axe. Brewster stopped him. The man fled into the woods before dawn. He was never seen again. The next morning, the remaining 12 continued west. But they were different now, frayed, sleepless, constantly looking over their shoulders. Their interpreter recorded in later testimony, if the testimony is genuine, that by this point the men were hearing the same sound every night, a repeated knocking, spaced evenly, like someone tapping stone with metal in a deliberate rhythm. It came from the distance at first, but each night it grew closer. The interpreter's supposed testimony ends with a single sentence. By the time we reached the wide river, we understood the knocking had never been chasing us. It had been guiding us. The wide river was almost certainly the Mississippi. Yet no official colonial record mentions English explorers reaching that area in 1673. That year is instead associated with the French expedition of Marquette and Joliet. And here the story grows even more curious. In Marquette's own journal, written in July 1673, he describes an unusual sight: footprints, large ones, made by many men along a mudbank near the river. He assumed they belonged to a hunting party or to a tribe he had not yet encountered. But he notes something else. The prints were accompanied by strange, clock-like impressions, equally spaced, as though made by some mechanical device, dragged or rolled along the ground. What was the meridian engine, really? A navigational tool, a prototype surveying instrument, or something more experimental, more ambitious, something the crown believed could give them dominance over the competing empires? We do not know. We cannot know. The next part of the story comes from an eerie archaeological anomaly discovered in 1938, when a drought lowered the Mississippi River enough to expose a sandbar near Iowa. Embedded in the sandbar were 12 wooden stakes arranged in a perfect circle, each carved with a unique symbol. The circle measured exactly 21 feet across, the same diameter specified for triangulation stations in a little-known English surveying manual from 1669. Nearby were fragments of leather, a rusted buckle, and half of a broken knife bearing an English maker's mark, consistent with the 1670s. Brewster's expedition should not have been anywhere near Iowa. Yet someone built that circle. When researchers analyzed the symbols carved into the stakes, they found something chilling. Every symbol matched the inscriptions on the astrolabe found in 1891. Not similar, identical. The stakes were radiocarbon dated, mid-17th century. The right time, the wrong place. No record, no explanation. And then there is the matter of the 13th stake, the missing one. Some say it was carried away by the river. Others believe it was never placed at all. But native stories collected from the region long before modern archaeology arrived speak of 13 travelers who came from the east, following the pattern of the sky, and how 12 completed the circle while the 13th refused. That refusal, the story says, opened the path that swallowed them. What path? To where? No answers, only fragments. The last known trace of the men comes from an artifact uncovered accidentally by a farmer in 1956 while plowing a field near Keokuk, Iowa. His plow struck metal. He unearthed a small brass plate engraved with the words, "Day 68, the knocking is beneath us now." Handwriting analysis confirms it matches the Brewster fragment. The plate also contains the same cipher found on the astrolabe, along with a crudely etched map of the region. But the map does not match the Mississippi Basin as we know it today. The rivers are twisted, distorted, closer to each other than they should be. Some researchers interpret this as artistic inaccuracy. Others argue it may represent the world as Brewster believed it existed beneath the surface. Beneath, because that is what the knocking implied. Not pursuit, not guidance, something else entirely. What happened to the men after day 68? No one knows. There is no trace of bodies, no written account, no confirmed artifact beyond the astrolabe and plate. But if local stories hold truth, then the land itself may have taken them into caves, into sinkholes, into some hidden realm shaped by ancient geology and older rituals. The Midwest is honeycombed with caverns and underground rivers, many still unmapped. Some collapse quietly, some open wider, and some, according to certain tribes, were entrances to places not meant for the living. Brewster's lost expedition remains one of America's least discussed historical anomalies, not because the evidence is weak, but because the evidence does not fit. Historians prefer mysteries with clean edges. This one bleeds across centuries, crossing boundaries of archaeology, folklore, astronomy, colonial politics, and human fear. Yet the astrolabe exists. The journal fragment exists. The wooden stakes existed. The brass plate exists. And the land remembers, even when people do not. All of this is only the beginning. The deeper story, the one that stretches across more than 3 centuries and links with strange events in modern times, starts not with Brewster, but with the discovery made in 2008 by a pair of hikers whose cell phone footage was confiscated by authorities and quietly suppressed. A video that, according to the single leaked still frame, shows a circular stone chamber buried beneath Iowa farmland, its walls carved with the same cipher that appeared on the astrolabe. But that is a later chapter. For now, imagine the 12 men on the morning of day 68, huddled around a fire that burned too low, staring at the ground because the knocking had begun again. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was coming from the earth beneath them, and they knew, finally, that the wilderness around them was not what they should have feared. It was what lay under it. The morning after the knocking grew loud enough to rattle their cups, the 12 surviving members of Brewster's expedition continued west with a silence so heavy it seemed to drag behind them like another shadow. No one spoke unless forced to. Even Brewster kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, avoiding the glances of the men who had once followed him with pride, but now followed him only because they feared what might happen if they stopped. The forest thinned as they moved toward the open plains, the trees giving way to long ribbons of grass that rippled under a restless wind. They felt exposed, more visible than they had been beneath the dense canopy of the east. But the knocking followed them still. On the night of their 71st day, they camped beside a shallow bend of river bordered by low bluffs. In modern maps, that river barely registers as a blue thread, but at the time, it was one of the few reliable landmarks in the uncharted interior. The men built a fire that hardly burned. The slightest gust scattered its embers. Brewster sat apart from the others, examining the Meridian engine by the dim glow of the flames. It was not round like a traditional astrolabe, but elongated, with adjustable arms that clicked softly as he moved them. The brass plates had begun to tarnish, turning the engravings into faint ghosts. But the central disc, the part engraved with the cipher, still shone. That night, the knocking came again, but differently. Not from beneath, not from the woods. It echoed across the plains, rising and falling as though traveling through hollow chambers beneath the earth. One of the men, Samuel Griggs, covered his ears and wept openly. Another, Thomas Blackwell, stood and screamed at the darkness, demanding whatever was following them reveal itself. The only answer was wind bending through tall grass. At dawn, Blackwell was gone. His footprints led toward the river, then stopped abruptly at the water's edge. The river was shallow enough to cross without drowning, yet there was no sign he had reached the opposite bank. They searched until the sun climbed high, shouting his name, firing muskets to echo their calls. Nothing. Only the rippling water, quietly rearranging the mud as though erasing the path he had taken. 2 days later, they found something else, something that should not have been there. A stone marker, carved into a perfect rectangular slab and half buried beneath prairie grass. The surface bore a series of symbols, concentric circles crossed by angled lines, identical to those etched on Brewster's device. Beneath the symbols lay a series of indentations, arranged in a pattern no one recognized, but which Brewster examined for nearly an hour without speaking. When he finally stood, his face was pale and his hands trembling. "It's older than the tribes," he whispered. "Older than the colonies. Older than the maps." No one asked what that meant. They did not want the answer. 4 more days passed before the land began to change. The plains sloped downward into a basin where the grass turned yellow, and the soil grew dark and loose beneath their boots. The wind died. The sky dimmed even at midday. It felt as though they had stepped into a bowl carved from silence itself. The interpreter, Elias Morgan, stopped walking and refused to go farther. "This is bad ground," he insisted. "Sinking ground, cursed ground." The others urged him on. Brewster offered reassurances he did not believe. Eventually, Elias relented, but he walked at the back of the group, never lifting his eyes from the soil. That evening, they discovered something extraordinary. A perfectly circular depression, about 30 feet wide, ringed with stones arranged so evenly that even the most skeptical among them recognized it as deliberate. At the center of the depression was a single, smooth pillar of limestone rising roughly 6 feet tall. Its surface had been polished to a sheen no weather could produce, and carved into the pillar shallowly, almost reverently, was the same cipher Brewster had spent months trying to decipher. The men approached cautiously, muskets raised. Brewster reached the pillar first. His fingers trembled as he traced the engravings. Then, without warning, the meridian engine in his satchel clicked sharply, an audible mechanical response, as though reacting to the pillar. Brewster stumbled back, dropping the device onto the soil. The men froze. The engine began to rotate. The central disc spun slowly, then faster still, until the symbols around its rim blurred into motion. The arms extended automatically, stretching like limbs awakening from sleep. The humming began next, a low vibration that resonated in the ground beneath their feet. The pillar answered with a faint glow that pulsed in time with the rotation. Samuel Griggs fell to his knees, praying in broken fragments. Elias Morgan backed away, whispering to himself. Brewster stared at the machine with an expression of awe and terror intertwined, like a man watching proof of something he desperately wished not to be true. Then came the knocking, not distant, not underground. It came from the pillar itself. Knock, knock, knock. Rhythmic, slow, deliberate. The men scattered. One fired his musket at the pillar. The shot ricocheted harmlessly. Brewster rushed forward, trying to close the arms of the engine, but the machine resisted. The humming grew louder. The pillar's glow deepened. A warm breeze rose from the depression, though the air around them was cold. "We have to leave," Elias shouted, but Brewster shook his head. "We're close, too close to turn back now. The machine is responding to it. This is the place described in the notes. This is what the crown sent us to find." "What place?" someone yelled. Brewster hesitated. Then, as if confessing a secret kept buried for years, he whispered, "The Meridian Gate." The men stared at him in disbelief. None had heard the term before. Brewster opened his journal with shaking hands, flipping to a page the others had not seen. The writing was cramped, frantic. "An opening," he read aloud. "A channel between the measurable world and the hidden geometry beneath it. A system older than any nation, a network aligned with the shifting of the stars." "You mean caves?" one of the soldiers said weakly. "No," Brewster replied. "Not caves, a design, a structure." Before he could elaborate, the ground beneath them shifted subtly, as though something massive had stirred deep below. They fell silent, listening. The humming of the engine ceased abruptly. The glow of the pillar faded. The air stilled. Then the river of knocking began. It rose from the soil in waves, traveling outward like ripples from a dropped stone. The men stumbled back, covering their ears as the vibrations traveled up through their bones. Brewster snatched the engine from the ground and backed away. The knocking grew louder, faster, more urgent. It no longer sounded like one entity. It sounded like many. The knocking stopped only when they had retreated to the edge of the basin, sweating and shaking. Not one of them slept that night. By morning, the pillar was silent. The depression looked empty, ordinary, as though nothing unusual had happened. But none of the men dared approach it again. Brewster insisted they continue west. The men argued. They accused him of hiding the true purpose of the journey. Brewster denied nothing. He simply said, "If we turn back now, we will never understand what we awakened." That was enough to silence them. though not enough to calm them. 3 days later, they encountered the first cave. It appeared unexpectedly at the base of a low cliff, concealed behind a curtain of hanging vines. The opening was wide, but the interior vanished into darkness that seemed unnaturally thick. Brewster approached first. The interpreter tried to stop him. "No," Elias said, grabbing his arm. "These caves, tribes avoid them. They say the earth here is alive. They say it listens." Brewster pulled free, then let it listen. Inside, the air was cold, colder than the surface, colder than any natural cave should have been in summer. Their torches burned weakly, the flames shrinking instead of growing. The walls bore carvings identical to those they had seen on the pillar. Concentric circles, angular lines, the same odd geometry repeated over and over, forming patterns that seemed almost too precise for stone. Deeper in, they reached a chamber shaped like a perfect dome. At its center lay a circular stone platform with a shallow depression. Brewster knelt beside it, brushing away dust. When his torchlight struck the stone, he gasped. There, faint but unmistakable, were markings identical to the base of the Meridian engine. The platform was a docking point. The engine had been made to fit into it. Someone or something had built this chamber long before the English, long before recorded history. A pre-existing design, a pre-existing purpose. "What does it do?" one of the men whispered. Brewster hesitated. "It aligns." "With what?" "The pulse of the earth." The interpreter shuddered. "The tribes speak of that. They say the ground has a heartbeat in these lands. They say it counts time differently." Brewster ignored him. He placed the Meridian engine into the depression on the platform. The reaction was immediate. The arms extended. The disc spun. The chamber vibrated. Lines carved into the walls began to glow faintly, breathing like living veins. The men scrambled backward, terrified. Brewster stood transfixed, watching the machine synchronize with whatever force beat beneath the stone. Then everything stopped. Instantly, completely. The machine froze. The chamber fell silent. The glow vanished. And in that sudden stillness, a single, resonant knock echoed through the cave. One knock, but it was not like the others. This one sounded close, very close, as though something stood directly behind them. They turned slowly. The far wall of the chamber was no longer smooth. It had cracked open slightly, revealing a narrow gap. Cold air poured from it, bringing with it a faint, metallic scent. Elias Morgan spoke first. "We are not meant to open that," Brewster whispered. "We are meant to find what waits beyond it." The men refused to enter. Brewster did not force them. He only looked into the crack, his eyes reflecting a pale glimmer from deeper within. When they emerged from the cave hours later, the sky was unnaturally dark for midday. A storm gathered on the horizon, though no wind stirred the grass. The expedition continued west, but their pace slowed. They no longer trusted the land. Shadows in the tall grass moved against the wind. Once, they heard a distant echo of the same knock, but distorted, as though coming from different directions at once. 2 nights later, another man vanished. This time, they heard him scream. They found only his satchel, torn open, lying beside a patch of disturbed soil. No footprints led away. No signs of struggle. Only a shallow indentation in the earth shaped like a circle. Brewster examined it and said nothing. By the time they reached the Mississippi River again, far north of where they had been before, only 10 of the original 13 remained. Their clothes were tattered, their nerves frayed, their food nearly gone. But Brewster insisted they were close to discovering the truth. The men no longer believed him. They stayed only because returning east meant crossing the same cursed ground again. On the 91st day of their journey, they built a temporary camp on a sandbar, illuminated by a moon so bright it cast shadows like daylight. The river flowed quietly, too quietly. The water seemed thick, slow. Brewster sat beside the edge, staring at the reflection of the stars. Elias joined him. "You know this will kill us," Elias said softly. Brewster did not look away from the water. "Discovery has a cost." Elias exhaled. "Then your crown has bought our lives cheaply." Brewster finally turned his eyes toward him. "Not the crown, me." The confession stunned Elias. Before he could speak, the ground beneath the sandbar vibrated gently. Brewster stiffened. Elias backed away. The knocking began again. Not from the earth, from the river. The water rippled rhythmically, each pulse sending small waves toward the shore. The men rushed toward the riverbank, muskets raised, staring in disbelief. Light shimmered beneath the surface, dim, faint, unnatural. The riverbed was glowing. The glow intensified, forming a line that ran parallel to the shore, stretching far into the distance. Then another line appeared, perpendicular to the first, and another, and another. A grid, a massive geometric grid emerging from beneath the Mississippi River, as though the land itself were revealing an ancient blueprint. Brewster stared with awe and terror. The meridian network. Before anyone could react, the glow vanished abruptly. The river returned to darkness. The knocking stopped. Only the men's shallow breathing filled the air. That night, Brewster wrote his final coherent journal entry. The plate found in 1956 was only part of it. Another fragment, discovered in 2008, but quietly suppressed, contained a line that historians rarely mention. We followed the knocking, but the knocking was not calling us. It was searching for its missing piece. The sky was bruised at dawn when Brewster awoke. The camp was silent. Only the river whispered against its banks, as though it too held its breath. In his satchel, the Meridian engine lay wrapped in oilcloth, half warm from its strange resonance the night before. He rose, stiff and hollow-eyed, stepping carefully among his sleeping men. One by one, he touched their shoulders, feeling the tremors of fear and exhaustion. 10 remained. 9 if you counted Blackwell as already lost, and Samuel Griggs, whose knees had trembled for days now, would not wake without trembling first. Brewster called a quiet meeting beside the riverbank. The men clustered in a ring, their faces gaunt under the pale morning light. Elias Morgan, his interpreter, spoke first. "We cannot go on," he said, voice trembling. "What we saw in the water, the geometry, the lines, it does not belong to any map I know. This is not just land. This is structure." Griggs nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I thought I understood exploration. But this is not exploration. It's awakening something, perhaps something that was sleeping long ago." A young soldier, Matthew Reed, spat out dust. "We were told we were building a trade route. Instead, I feel like we've walked into something older than England, older than anyone's claim." Brewster lifted his chin. "When we began, I promised the Crown that we would chart unknown lands, that we would bring back knowledge that could strengthen their power. But somewhere along the way, I learned there is more at stake than maps or trade. This network, this design, is part of something older, something deeper than any king's ambition. If I stop now, we betray what we discovered." Silence closed around them as the magnitude of his words sank in. Then Elias shook his head. "You may feel betrayed, Nathaniel, but you must see reason. I refuse to lead any more men into darkness." Before Brewster could answer, Griggs cleared his throat. "If we stay, we risk more than our lives. If we leave, who will believe us? Who will even know where we were?" Brewster's dark eyes flickered. His voice softened, steady but hollow. "I will document it. I will map it. I will bring a record back, even if I return alone." They argued late into the morning. Some wanted to return east, others fearful, but driven by something they did not fully understand, decided to follow Brewster deeper into the unknown. By noon, 5 men volunteered to accompany him. The rest tried to rest, pack, gather what they could. Tension weighed heavily on every motion. That evening, they set off again, carrying torches, rope, food, and water. They left the Sandbar, crossing a narrow spit of land that jutted into the river, then ascended a low bluff where they found another cavern entrance hidden behind dense undergrowth. It looked natural at first, smoke-blackened stone, a yawning mouth that beckoned. But as they approached, lines etched into the rock caught the firelight, more concentric circles, more angular lines, matching exactly those on Brewster's device. Brewster paused at the mouth of the cavern, waiting for his men. He raised his torch, and shadows danced across the stone. The air smelled faintly of ozone, of metal, and something else, old earth, like grave soil that had not been disturbed for centuries. "Steady," he said softly. "We proceed together." They entered. The air inside was cool and damp. Their footsteps echoed in a wide corridor. The walls, when they came closer, were carved with bas-reliefs, symbols, constellations, diagrams of stars. Some patterns looked like maps of celestial spheres, Others looked like geometric networks, diagrams of lines connecting points in three-dimensional space. Brewster's torch flickered, revealing a ceiling high enough that they could not see its top, but they felt its scale. Morgan whispered, "This was made by people who saw beyond our sky." Griggs, torch in hand, shivered. Who were they? They moved deeper, until they reached a chamber where the floor was a mosaic of stone tiles. The tiles were polished, worn, but each tile carried a symbol, a star, a circle, a cross, lines radiating outward, lines intersecting. In the center stood a pedestal, carved from a single slab of stone, polished smooth. The pedestal's shape matched the base of the Meridian engine almost perfectly. Brewster knelt, setting the engine onto the pedestal. The men held their breath. The device whirred softly, then spun faster and faster, as though waking from deep slumber. The walls responded. Patterns lit up. Lines glowed faintly in the stone, tracing paths as though drawn by invisible hands. The effect was ethereal, as if the entire chamber were a living diagram. Then came a hum so low it felt like vibration through bone. The torchlight pulsed. Brewster stepped forward, his eyes shining. "What is this place?" Griggs asked. Brewster did not answer. He traced the glowing lines with his fingers. Each symbol corresponded to an arm of the device, a direction, a connection. It was not just a machine, it was a key, a mechanism that aligned them with something vast. Suddenly, a distant echo filled the chamber knocking, but this time sharper, rhythmic, insistent. Each knock reverberated through the floor, the walls, the ceiling. It was as though the entire structure were speaking, calling. Brewster whispered, "Do you hear it? The network is alive." Morgan backed away, trembling. "We should leave." But just then, the floor trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. The lines on the walls glowed brighter. The hum grew to a roar and then stopped. Everything went still. Their torches flickered, and for a moment, darkness swallowed them. When light returned, they saw that the far end of the chamber had changed. Where there had been a smooth wall, there was now an archway. Whether it was carved anew or revealed from behind collapsed rock, they could not tell. But there it stood, a gateway formed in shadow and stone, framed by symbols. Brewster rose, breathing fast. A gate. His voice trembled with exhilaration. A real gate. Griggs swallowed hard. Should we enter? No one moved. The torchlight flickered against the arch. The symbols glowed faintly, inviting and terrible. Finally, Brewster said, "We go." They stepped through. On the other side of the arch, the chamber opened into a cavern, so vast it defied belief. The ceiling soared far above, lost in shadows. Gargantuan pillars, natural and carved in rows around them, supporting ribs of rock that branched like ancient trees. There were openings, stair-like formations, terraces carved into walls. The floor sloped downward into darkness. Spots of light, natural phosphorescence, or something else glowed in the distance. The air was thick, humid, tinged with mineral scent. Griggs dared to speak. It's a city, Brewster swallowed, or a temple. Morgan shook his head, awe and fear together. Who built this? They advanced slowly. Every step felt measured, as though they were walking a ritual. The geometry carved into walls and pillars grew more complex. Three-dimensional lattices, diagrams of the sky, maps that seemed to represent not just geography, but something cosmic. In the center of the cavern, they discovered a pool of water, mirror-still, dark, impossibly deep. It reflected the faint glow from above, throwing soft light onto a low dais beside it. On the dais lay a slab roughly rectangular, with more symbols carved into it. Brewster knelt, torch in hand, and ran his fingers over the designs. "This is the heart of the network," he said, voice trembling. "This pool, this dais, it's a node." The knocking began again, low and measured, like distant footsteps echoing in corridors. It built in volume until it felt like the cavern itself was speaking. The men gripped their torches, bracing themselves. Brewster placed the Meridian engine on the dais. The device responded immediately. The disc spun, arms extended, aligning with the carved lines on the slab. Light pulsed in the water below, racing in ripples across the surface. The pool vibrated as though answering, resonating with the machine. A figure emerged. Not a man, not an animal, but something shaped from stone and water and light. It coalesced slowly, rising from the pool, a shape roughly humanoid, but translucent, luminous. Its form flickered, as though made of living geometry. Its head was crowned with lines that stretched upward, like constellations arranged into a crown. The men gasped. Griggs fell to his knees. Morgan froze, his torch trembling in his grasp. Brewster took a step forward, tears in his eyes. What are you?" he whispered. The figure watched them, unmoving, then raised an arm, or what looked like an arm. Its gesture was unthreatening, almost welcoming. As it moved, lines of light traced across its body, matching the symbols on the walls. In a voice that sounded like wind through crystal, it spoke, not in English, not in the tongues Brewster knew, but in a cadence that matched the hum of the network itself. And yet Brewster understood. "We built this," it said, "long ago, before your maps, before your kings. We built the Meridian network to remember, so that knowledge would endure, so that time itself could be measured, preserved, aligned." Its voice swallowed the men's breath. The pool glowed brighter. The dais shone like a star. "Why are you here?" Brewster asked, voice small. "To open the gate," the figure replied. "To let the network awaken." Brewster's heart pounded. "But we did not know." "You came with questions," said the figure. "The network heard you. The machine responded. We are one." There was a long pause. The men watched. Brewster looked from the being to his device, to the carved diagrams, and back. "What will happen now?" he said, voice trembling. "We will remember you," said the figure, "and you will return if you choose. But first, We offer a share of what we hold. The being lowered a hand toward the pool. The water shimmered. From its depths, shapes began to rise. Motes of light, swirling lines, small spheres that floated upward like wisps of energy, drifting toward Brewster and his men. Brewster swallowed hard. "A gift," he whispered. The figure nodded, then raised both arms, and the pool responded. The water lit with luminous geometry, lines drawn in light, constellations forming, dissolving, reforming. It was as if the network itself projected a map of stars, of corridors, of ancient points of connection across continents and across time. Griggs, tears in his eyes, whispered, "It's knowledge. Knowledge beyond us." Morgan's voice was quiet. "They measured the sky, and they measured the earth. They linked them." Brewster stood, steadying himself. "We will carry this back. We will tell the crown. But whatever we do, we must protect it. It cannot be destroyed." The being regarded him. "It cannot be owned." "I understand," Brewster said softly. There was another pause. Then the figure stepped backward, melting into the pool. The light faded. The network's hum settled into silence. The device stopped spinning. The glow on the walls dimmed. The archway behind them, the gateway, slowly collapsed, the stones shifting, sealing itself with a final, soft rumble. When they turned to leave, the path looked changed, as though the chamber had shifted in the dark. Some steps they remembered were gone. New terraces and staircases had appeared. The cavern felt alive, responsive, as though it had rearranged to guard itself. They emerged into the night, shaken and awed. The sky was clear, and the stars shone with cold brilliance. Brewster looked up, feeling the weight of what he'd witnessed, what he now carried. They did not speak as they packed and began their return journey. Each man was lost in his own silence. The knocking continued, but now it felt different, gentle, distant, as though the network whispered goodnight. On the way back, they retraced their route, but the land no longer seemed the same. The depression, the pillar, the caves, they all felt altered, as though the act of entering had changed them. Blackwell's absence lay like a wound upon them. The memory of the others who vanished haunted their steps. At one point, Morgan stopped again. "Nathaniel," he said, voice low, "what if no one believes us?" Brewster paused. He stared at the horizon. "Then we will prove it." They reached the Mississippi River's edge days later. The river flowed placidly now, unlit, calm. The men gathered once more, staring at the water. For a moment, no one dared to speak. Finally, Brewster broke the silence. "We came seeking trade routes. We came seeking a machine. But what we found," he trailed off, looking at the faces lit by torchlight. "What we found was more than a route. It was a legacy. They built rafts from driftwood, using their remaining ropes, and floated downstream, carrying what they could: the Meridian engine, the journals, the notes. 4 men remained behind to lighten their load, deciding to follow in the rafts later. But before leaving, they made a promise. One day, they would return. They would help preserve the network, guard its secret, and continue its work. Downriver, they encountered their first European travelers since they had departed. A French fur-trading party, surprised to see Englishmen so far inland. The meeting was tense but civil. Brewster did not reveal the secret, though he watched their maps and their journals, thinking of the network beneath their feet, the hidden chambers, the geometry. They passed rebuilt colonial outposts, trading forts, and gradually, the landscape turned familiar. The air tasted like salt and cedar as they drew nearer to the eastern settlements. When they finally disembarked, they were shadows of who they had been. Ragged clothes, hollow cheeks, eyes too alert, too haunted. They made their way east, but the journey home was fraught. Brewster fell sick at one point, fever and chills. Someone fell into a river at night and nearly drowned. Tent poles broke. Provisions ran low. But slowly, painfully, they pressed on. When they reached Rhode Island at last, the settlement was nearly unrecognizable. It had grown, changed in their absence. People greeted them with relieved surprise. Brewster kept much to himself, avoiding curious questions. That night, he locked himself in his small study, unwrapped the Meridian engine, and began writing feverishly. He recorded everything: the pillar, the caves, the gateway, the figure in the water, the pool, the gift of light, the hum, the geometry. He sketched diagrams, copying from memory the patterns on the walls, the symbols on the pedestal. He wrote in code for part of it, ciphered passages that only those familiar with the device would understand. His journal grew heavy with pages, but Brewster felt urgency. He needed to preserve his account before memory or death claimed it. He wrote until his hand shook so badly he could not hold his quill. But he did not stop. One morning, he called Elias Morgan to his side. He handed him a folded leather packet. "Take this to England," he said, "to the Crown, to those who will understand." Morgan opened the packet. Inside was a sketch of the network chamber, the being, the pool, and the gateway. Also, a plan, a rough but precise map of the caves, the archways, and the surface markers, the pillar, the depression, the stone slab, the standing stones. Finally, a portion of the Meridian engine's design, drawn carefully, indicating the way its arms moved, the mechanisms behind its alignment. Morgan looked up, voice heavy. "If the Crown gets this, they may try to exploit it." Brewster nodded grimly. "Perhaps, but knowledge hides no longer. I cannot bury it. Not now." Morgan paused, as if measuring the weight of his choice. Then he closed the packet. "I will carry it," he said quietly. "But I warn you, I may not make it back." Brewster's jaw tightened. "Then I will finish the work. I will return." Morgan gave him a sad look, then left. Brewster spent the next weeks restoring his strength. He wrote letters to colleagues in England, to trusted friends, to societies of learned men, and hinted at discoveries too profound to speak of plainly. He hid portions of his journal in separate places. One copy buried in his study under loose floorboards, another in the bottom of an old chest, another sent with Morgan. He prepared for the possibility that his work might be lost, but he hoped it would be preserved. On a late summer evening, as he sat outside his little house, listening to the wind in the trees, Brewster realized he had changed forever. He no longer saw the forest or the rivers in terms of progress or commerce. He saw them as living structures, interwoven with geometry, memory, and purpose. The world was not only land to be mapped, it was a design to be remembered. He closed his eyes, imagining the cavern, the being, the pool, the glowing lines. He heard the faint knock, like a heartbeat beneath rock. He thought of his 12 companions, some lost, some alive, and wondered whether any of them understood what they had done, what they had opened. He whispered into the night, "We will return, we will come prepared." And somewhere beneath the earth, something answered. The journey back east was grueling, but Brewster moved with a sense of urgency that kept him awake, even when exhaustion threatened to topple him. The Meridian engine rested in a case made from salvaged oak and rope. Its presence, a constant reminder of the weight they carried, knowledge centuries old, yet fragile in human hands. His remaining companions, Griggs, Reed, and Morgan, were silent most of the time, speaking only when necessary, each lost in their own contemplation of what they had seen. Nights were the worst. Every rustle of grass, every distant howl, every snap of a branch could make their hearts jump. But Brewster had begun to notice a rhythm underlying the terror, a pattern in the knocks, a subtle cadence that sometimes synchronized with his own heartbeat. He found himself tracing it in the dirt with a stick, as though the soil itself would respond, give some hint of its hidden logic. Once a knock came from below him so sharp, so sudden, that he fell to his knees, shaking, his ears ringing with the echo. The first sign that the network was following them came near a narrow ridge overlooking a valley. The morning fog lay thick, clinging to the slopes and hiding the river below. Brewster, walking ahead, noticed the ground beneath his boots vibrate gently, faint but unmistakable. He stopped, motioning the others to halt. The vibration increased in waves, moving from the ridge downward toward the river, almost as if something unseen was scanning their position. Griggs whispered, "It's still alive. It's tracking us." Brewster nodded slowly. "It's not malevolent, not yet. It's testing." Reed shivered. "Testing what? Our courage, our sanity." Brewster said nothing. They crossed the ridge, and the valley opened before them, wide and empty, yet feeling crowded with invisible presence. The fog swirled unnaturally, forming shapes that vanished when approached. They set up camp near the river, and Brewster began sketching the patterns he observed in the dirt, using the Meridian engine to test alignment. That night, he dreamed of the cavern, of the figure in the pool, of light flowing in impossible geometric patterns, connecting stars, rivers, and mountains, as if the world itself were a diagram waiting to be read. The next day, they encountered remnants of what they assumed to be an abandoned settlement. Only traces remained: stone foundations, a half-collapsed wooden shelter, and a fire pit cold for decades. Yet in the stones, Brewster discerned the same angular patterns, carved faintly but deliberately. Lines connecting one stone to another formed a grid overlaying the land, invisible from above, but clear from the alignment of rocks and trees. Morgan's voice broke the reverie. "Do you think these were the work of the same builders? The network?" Brewster nodded. "It's all connected. Every settlement, every cave, every stone. They left reminders, paths, nodes. The meridian engine is merely a key to perceive it." Griggs frowned. But why? Why hide it underground? Why leave clues only a few could decipher? Because knowledge, when too powerful, must wait, Brewster said. It waits for those willing to understand responsibility. By the time they reached the borderlands of the Carolinas, their provisions were running low. They relied on hunting small game, foraging wild fruits, and the occasional river fish. The men's morale began to fray. At night, Griggs whispered to Brewster about turning back, fearing not just the journey, but the burden they carried. Brewster's response was always the same. "We are already beyond the point of return. Every step backward risks losing what we've awakened." One evening, as the sun bled crimson over the horizon, they discovered a second cave, smaller and less conspicuous than the first. Brewster approached cautiously, torch in hand. The entrance was narrow, but inside, the walls were lined with carvings even more intricate than those in the previous chamber. Symbols flowed like water, connecting naturally to one another in spirals and curves that suggested movement and purpose. At the center lay a shallow basin filled with water. Brewster knelt, placing the meridian engine into its depression. Immediately, the water glowed, a pale luminescence rising in ripples, tracing arcs across the stone walls. The device hummed, vibrating faintly in his hands, and the knocking returned, subtle at first, then building, echoing through the cavern, as though the walls themselves were alive. Then the air shifted. A current of cold wind swept through the chamber, carrying whispers in a language they could not understand, yet somehow comprehended. Patterns, warnings, guidance. Brewster felt his mind expand, glimpsing structures across continents, networks of stone and water, of light and shadow, of rivers, mountains, and sky. The network revealed itself as both vast and intimate, ancient yet immediate. "Do you see it?" Brewster asked, his voice trembling. Griggs and Morgan stared at the basin, torches reflecting in the glowing water. The network isn't just local. It spans the world. The pillars, the caverns, the machines, they are nodes in a planetary system. Griggs swallowed hard. "And we are part of it." "Yes," Brewster replied softly. "Or perhaps it is part of us. Every alignment, every pulse, every knock, it resonates with life itself." They spent hours in the cave, mapping the symbols, recording patterns, knotting alignments. Brewster realized that certain constellations corresponded to nodes they had passed, suggesting that the builders had encoded knowledge of astronomy, geography, and geometry together. The network was both map and mechanism, device and living archive. By dawn, they left the cave, exhausted but enlightened. They continued east, occasionally noticing faint traces in the land, depressions, stone markers, unusual vegetation. Each was a reminder that the network's reach extended far beyond their immediate perception. Weeks passed. They approached colonial settlements, moving cautiously. Brewster sent letters ahead under assumed names, hinting at discoveries, but withholding critical knowledge. The Meridian engine was kept hidden, disguised as a mundane mechanical instrument. During their journey, Brewster began to notice subtle anomalies, shadows that moved independently, light shifting unnaturally in the trees, faint knocking that followed them even in open fields. It was as if the network had learned of their movement, tracking them, responding to their progress. One night, while camped near a river in Virginia, a sudden tremor shook the ground. The men awoke to see faint blue light emanating from the soil around them. Brewster realized that the network was communicating, sending signals that could only be interpreted by someone with the engine. He spent hours aligning the device, tracing symbols in the dirt, until the pattern emerged. A warning. "The Meridian gate has changed," Brewster whispered. "The nodes are shifting. Something or someone has interfered." Griggs froze. Interfered by whom? Brewster shook his head. "I do not know. But if we are to preserve this knowledge, we must reach safety before it rearranges further." They pressed on, reaching the outskirts of Williamsburg. Brewster contacted trusted acquaintances, using letters and secret messengers to arrange secure storage for the engine and his journals. He ensured the network's knowledge would not fall into careless hands. On the final leg of their journey, Brewster reflected on the expedition. The Meridian network was not just an artifact of ancient builders. It was a living system, responsive, intelligent, and incomprehensibly old. It connected geography, astronomy, and human curiosity into a framework that transcended time. When they finally reached Boston, the city bustling with colonial life, Brewster felt a profound separation from the ordinary world. He had seen a reality beneath reality, a hidden order that had waited millennia for discovery. His companions were forever changed, their minds carrying memories and insights that could not be shared fully. Brewster arranged for the Meridian engine to be hidden in a secure location, leaving maps and partial journals for posterity. He instructed Morgan to deliver copies to England, carefully coded to prevent misuse. Griggs and Reed were granted passage home with minimal disclosure, tasked only with preserving the expedition's secrecy. As Brewster walked through Boston streets, he sensed the subtle hum beneath the city, the faint knock beneath the cobblestones, the living geometry of the land he had traversed. The Meridian network had become part of him, as he had become part of it. He spent the rest of his days documenting what he could, writing in code where necessary, sketching diagrams, and preparing for the possibility of a return journey. In private, he dreamed of the cavern, the figure in the pool, and the pulsing nodes that connected continents. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, the network waited, watching, responding to the pulses of humanity, ready for the next step in its ancient design. Brewster knew that one day, perhaps centuries later, someone would find the journals, the engine, the traces, and awaken the network once more. Until then, he carried its secret alone, a bridge between the known world and the hidden geometry that underlay it. The knocking never ceased entirely. It became part of his life, a reminder that beneath every hill, every river, every plain, there existed a rhythm older than kingdoms, older than men, guiding, observing, preserving. And he, Nathaniel Brewster, had walked its path. The years that followed Brewster's return to Boston were filled with a tense routine. By day, he conducted himself as a gentleman of the colony, attending meetings, observing trade, recording mundane events in a visible journal. But by night, he immersed himself in the secret knowledge he had carried back, studying the Meridian engine, reviewing his sketches, and pondering the network's vast, uncharted geometry. The knocking persisted in his dreams, a faint echo that tugged at his consciousness, reminding him that the network was patient, deliberate, and far from finished. He never spoke openly of what he had seen. Not to Griggs, not to Reed, and certainly not to Morgan, who had returned to England. Brewster understood that few could comprehend the magnitude of his discoveries, and fewer still could resist the temptation to misuse them. The Meridian network was not a treasure to be hoarded, nor a weapon to be wielded. It was a system of intelligence, an archive older than civilization itself, designed to preserve, to guide, and to test the worthiness of those who encountered it. One evening, as the candlelight flickered across the walls of his study, Brewster noticed something he had not before, a subtle pattern emerging in the maps he had drawn of the expedition. Lines that had seemed random, aligning nodes and rivers, were forming a larger design, a sequence that extended beyond the American colonies, hinting at a global network. The network was not static. It adjusted, shifted, responded to human activity. It had followed them, even to Boston. The realization struck him with equal parts awe and fear. If the network was aware, intelligent in some incomprehensible sense, then their every action might be observed, measured, and evaluated. Every attempt to record, to map, to understand, was a step within a test they barely understood. The Meridian engine had allowed them to perceive it, but perception alone was not mastery. Weeks passed. Brewster began corresponding secretly with a small circle of scholars in England. Using coded letters and intermediaries, he shared select insights about ancient geometry, astronomical alignments, and natural phenomena without revealing the network's true scope. One letter, sent in haste through Morgan, carried diagrams of celestial nodes, lines of longitude and latitude intersecting with rivers and mountains, and a subtle cipher hinting at the existence of a larger, hidden system. But with each correspondence, Brewster noticed subtle disturbances in the engine. It hummed faintly in response to his sketches, aligning itself with patterns that had not existed when he returned. The network was alive. It was evolving. And Brewster realized with growing dread it was learning from him. In the early spring, news arrived of a shipment bound for the Caribbean, carrying European machinery and materials. Among the crates, Brewster suspected, could be tools or instruments capable of discovering or exploiting the network. Panic gripped him. If the wrong hands uncovered it, the results could be catastrophic. He gathered Griggs and Reed, sharing what he could of the network's intelligence. "We cannot leave it exposed," Brewster said. "Even the smallest error could awaken forces we cannot control." Griggs, older and more cautious than during their journey, frowned. "What do you propose?" "We must return," Brewster said simply. "We must go back to the nodes, realign them, ensure the network remains intact. We cannot predict its next reaction, but we can prepare, and we must." Preparations took weeks. Brewster studied every map, every sketch, every note from the expedition. He modified the Meridian engine, reinforcing it with brass fittings, adjusting the arms to measure unknown angles. Supplies were gathered discreetly, enough for travel inland, but light enough to move quickly. Reed, eager and braver than his years, insisted on accompanying them. Griggs was reluctant, older now, wary of further exposure to the network's influence, but Brewster's resolve was infectious. They departed Boston under the cover of night, traveling by river and forest paths, avoiding colonial roads. As they moved westward, Brewster felt the network's presence in subtle ways. Faint pulses beneath the soil, a hum in the air, shadows moving against the natural flow of light. Each pulse was a signal, a communication, a challenge. They were being tested again. Upon reaching the first pillar near the sandbar, Brewster noticed a subtle change. The depression that had once held the engine perfectly was now slightly misaligned with the surrounding stones. The pillar itself bore fresh markings, tiny scratches, shallow but deliberate, forming a pattern they had not seen before. "The network is reshaping itself," Brewster said. "It adapts to those who approach." Reed's voice was tense. "Then it's no longer just a record. It's conscious." Brewster nodded grimly. "Conscious, intelligent, and aware. We must proceed with care. One misstep, and it could respond unpredictably." They moved onward to the caves and chambers that had first revealed the hidden city. The cavern entrances appeared unchanged, yet inside, Brewster noticed that the symbols now glowed faintly, even without the engine's activation. The network was awake before them. When Brewster placed the engine in the central depressions, it hummed immediately. as though recognizing an intruder's hand and assessing intention. Then something extraordinary happened. The water in the central pools began to stir, rising in small waves that formed shapes resembling maps, figures, and constellations. Lines of light traced arcs across the walls, converging toward a single point at the cavern's center. Brewster realized this was the heart of the network, the central node, a place of convergence connecting every other node they had discovered. It's a control center, he whispered, or a nexus. All nodes lead here. Every alignment we've seen is oriented toward this point. Griggs stepped forward, awe and fear battling in his expression. If this is true, then everything we've seen, the pillars, the stones, the caves, they're not isolated. They're components of a global system. This is beyond human comprehension. Brewster nodded. We are only caretakers. Our task is to maintain balance, to preserve knowledge, and to ensure the network remains hidden from those who would misuse it. As they studied the nexus, the luminous figure from the first cavern appeared again, rising from the pool. Its form was more defined now, humanoid, but layered with geometric patterns, glowing faintly with intelligence. It spoke, its voice a mixture of sound and vibration. You return, it said. You have learned. You have observed. Now you must act. Brewster stepped forward, voice steady. We are ready. Tell us what must be done. Alignment is required, the figure replied. The network shifts with time and intention. You must recalibrate the nodes, restore balance, and secure knowledge. The meridian engine is the key, but the hands must be guided by understanding, not desire. For days, Brewster, Griggs, and Reed worked within the cavern, moving the engine across depressions, adjusting angles, tracing light patterns, and observing how the network responded. Each alignment sent ripples through the pools, corridors, and chambers. Symbols glowed, pulsed, then faded, signaling success. Misalignments resulted in subtle tremors, faint echoes, or unexpected shifts in glowing patterns, a warning of potential danger. During this process, Brewster realized something profound. The network did not merely store knowledge, it was a living archive, capable of sensing human thought and intention, capable of guiding those who interacted with it. It tested morality, perseverance, intelligence, and caution. The knocks, the pulses, the movements, they were not threats, they were communication. Reed spoke one evening, exhaustion etched across his face. It's alive. It reacts. It judges. I feel watched, evaluated, even guided. Brewster nodded. And that is its purpose. We are not masters here. We are custodians. By the time they finished their alignment, the pools glowed with calm. The symbols on walls radiated a harmonious light, and the network's hum settled into a gentle pulse, synchronized with the earth itself. The luminous figure nodded once before dissolving into the water, leaving only its residual glow. Brewster felt a sense of awe and relief. The network was stable once more, its purpose preserved. its intelligence unthreatened. The Meridian engine had fulfilled its function, not as a weapon or a tool, but as a bridge between human curiosity and ancient knowledge. The journey back to Boston was quiet but purposeful. The men carried no fear, only a deep respect for what they had witnessed. Brewster carefully documented every detail, sketching maps, writing encoded passages, and preparing instructions for future guardians. Upon reaching Boston, Brewster entrusted the engine and journals to secure storage beneath the city, hidden from those who would exploit them. Griggs and Reed departed, carrying only fragments of knowledge sufficient for survival and cautionary tales. Brewster remained, knowing that some secrets were too profound to share openly. In the years that followed, Brewster continued to write, observe, and occasionally hear the faint knocking beneath the earth, a reminder that the network endured, awake and eternal. He died many years later, respected as a scholar, remembered as an explorer, but his true legacy knowledge of the Meridian network remained secret, preserved in journals, maps, and the hidden device that had allowed humanity to glimpse the living geometry beneath the world. And beneath the earth, the network pulsed, patient, intelligent, and waiting, always ready for the next seeker who would come with the courage, wisdom, and responsibility to walk its paths.